Palestinian Islamic Jihad and Israel declare a truce. After 3 days of bombardment, quiet has returned to Gaza. But how long will the so-called peace last? And are any efforts underway to correct the underlying cause of this conflict? I'm Andrea Sankey, and today's newsmaker is the attack on Gaza. The ceasefire in Gaza began, like many in the past, with municipality workers removing rubble and determining the extent of the destruction. The physical damage can be ascertained, but the emotional toll is incalculable. Half of the dozens killed so far have been civilians, mostly children. But Israel's military still considers this a victory in its war against the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Also known as the PIJ, it's the second biggest militia in Gaza after Hamas. Israel says it's inflicted severe damage on its leaders and infrastructure. 2 of the PIJ's senior commanders were killed over the weekend. According to the New York Times, many of the group's bases and weapons factories were destroyed, but the report adds that little is known about the fighters' arsenal. And Israel says its actions prevented an imminent attack, but has declined to provide more details. On the other hand, Palestinian Islamic Jihad is also declaring that it now has the upper hand.
The enemy aimed to break Islamic Jihad, but we didn't break. On the contrary, we made an achievement and we forced the conditions that we started the battle for with the enemy. Simply, this is how simple the deal was, and the achievement is clear.
Well, in spite of whoever declared victory, it is the people of Gaza who continue to suffer. 2/3 of the population are now refugees, with over 500,000 people living in camps. 97% of Gaza's water is undrinkable. Electricity is only available during half the day. And in what could indicate the most dire, lasting damage, 4 out of 5 children in Gaza report living with fear, grief, and depression. That fear and anxiety among children is legitimate, given just how many have lost their lives in Gaza. Over the weekend, 5-year-old Alaa Khadoum was killed when an Israeli airstrike reportedly hit a group of people gathered outside a mosque.
What is this child's fault? She was dreaming of going to kindergarten and asking her father for a school bag and clothes. What has she done wrong, this innocent child? She was preparing for kindergarten. She was going to start kindergarten. What is this child's fault, this innocent girl? Was she firing rockets or fighting? God is greatest.
So is this latest round of violence just another part in a seemingly endless cycle, or could this truce lead to something more lasting? Let's discuss that now with our panel. And joining me from Ramallah in the occupied West Bank is Mustafa Barghouti. He's the Secretary General of the Palestinian National Initiative. Omar Baddar joins us from Washington. He's a former Deputy Director of the Arab American Institute. And also in Washington is Dave Harden. He's led USAID's assistance mission in Gaza and the West Bank for more than a decade. Thanks all so much for being with us. Omar, I'll start with you. First, let's get a better sense, if we can, of how Gazans may be feeling right now, and explain, especially these images we've seen of celebration after the ceasefire was announced. What exactly are they celebrating? Is it just a stop in the fighting, or is there an Islamic Jihad victory to be commended somehow?
Look, I think Gaza has been through a lot for the past 15 years plus of living under an illegal Israeli siege that has really made life nearly impossible in the Gaza Strip. Just tremendous and ongoing suffering and death that seems to be endless. And obviously, every time there's another round of violence in which Israel unleashes its military force on the Gaza Strip, mostly for no reason, as they have in this case, that just amplifies the amount of death and suffering that Gaza witnesses. And anytime that there's a stop to that, that is certainly something that can be a bit of a relief. Though, unfortunately, obviously, it puts us back to a status quo that is ultimately untenable, because it puts us back in a situation in which Palestinians in Gaza are still denied freedom, are still unable to travel in and out, are still unable to enjoy normal life the way anybody else in the world is. So it really seems to be only a matter of time before there is another round of violence, because injustice fundamentally breeds violence. There's just no way for you to achieve a genuine, long and lasting peace that everybody can enjoy as long as you have Palestinians living in a situation where they're denied freedom.
Right. I mean, Omar, there is a lot of history and context here, but still, Israel is arguing that this is specifically about what Islamic Jihad was planning. Mustafa Barghouti, let me ask you. Islamic Jihad, for example, says that one of its primary goals is to unite all Palestinians, that is what it's fighting for. But to what extent do Palestinians actually support Islamic Jihad? Is there more support here or frustration that they are actually blaming Islamic Jihad for this latest escalation specifically with Israel?
No Palestinian is blaming Jihad for what has happened because the one side that initiated this aggression on Gaza and initiated this war, if you want to call it a war or a clash, was Israel. Israel launched an attack on Gaza, which was totally unprovoked. For 5 days, they've been trying to provoke a reaction from the side of Islamic Jihad and other resistance groups in Gaza, and the resistance abstained from responding. And then Israel launched an attack. So it was a clear aggression, totally unprovoked, totally unjustified. And on the contrary, Palestinians saw that Islamic Jihad was simply initiating self-defense against Israeli attack on Gaza, and also against Israeli attacks on Palestinians in the West Bank. We have to remember that Gaza has been under military siege by sea, by air, by land, from the Israeli side for 16 years now. People are suffering because of that. And we have been under military occupation since 55 years, and it's not ending. So the cause of all problems is the occupation, which has transformed now into a system of apartheid combined with Israeli military attacks on Palestinians from time to time.
Okay. Mustafa, I'm going to ask you this as well because you are in the immediate region. You know, leading figures of the PIJ have been killed. What do you think happens now to the organization? Will others simply step in to fill the void? Or has the Palestinian Islamic Jihad organization taken a serious hit to its command structure now?
I don't think anybody can speak of a victory here to anybody, but one can easily speak about Israeli failure. It is clear that Israel wanted from this operation to achieve major military achievements. They achieved nothing. Killing 2 of the leaders does not mean much because there are many other leaders there who can take over the spaces that became vacant. And I don't think Israel managed to achieve what it wanted. The main goal of this attack on al-Jihad in Gaza was to break down the Palestinian resistance in the West Bank. And I don't see any of that happening. They also aimed at creating a split inside the Palestinian resistance. What happened was the opposite. I think the whole Palestinian population everywhere, not only in the West Bank and Gaza, but also inside 1948 areas in Israel itself, there were lots of popular demonstrations against this attack. So no, I don't think Israel has caused any serious injury to al-Jihad.
Dave, are you on the same page there? Has Israel effectively only exacerbated the resistance resolve in this case?
I mean, actually, I think that this latest clash is not particularly meaningful from either perspective. I mean, I agree with Omar in the sense that we need to look back to 2005 and Gaza disengagement. And our view then at that time was that economic pressure would yield political change, right? If you put enough economic pressure on Hamas and PIJ, they would moderate, get out of the way, or adapt to kind of the realities. The fact of the matter is, all of the kind of moderating forces, business community, civil society, academia, they've all been defeated in the ensuing 16 years, and it's only Hamas and PIJ that exercise full control. And in addition, over these 15 years, their weapons capability has gotten substantially stronger. So in my view, this is an absolute loss across the board and no lessons learned over the last 15 years.
Yet, let me clarify your argument, Dave, because you have said that you believe the real problem in Gaza, the real problems in Gaza are actually rooted in Hamas being the undisputed power there. You actually have cited progress in Jenin as an example to prove that point. Explain.
Yeah, so in 2005, during Gaza disengagement, there was also disengagement out of the northern West Bank near Jenin. And we had two competing theories at that time. In Gaza, it was economic pressure would yield political change, and Hamas would get out of the way or moderate, right? But the opposite theory was the case in Jenin, and that was economic opportunity would yield political change. And so we have the benefit, which is a little rare in foreign affairs, to look at the results of these theories 15 years later. And what we saw in Jenin was a reduction in
What kind
unemployment.
of disengagement in Jenin?
Sorry?
Who said there was disengagement in Jenin?
There were 4 Israeli settlements that were evacuated out of the northern
And two of
Sorry?
them already occupied again by the Israeli army. There was no disengagement in Jenin. It
There were
was
4
two little spots only.
4
And
settlements.
you cannot call that withdrawal or disengagement at all.
There were 4 settlements in the northern West Bank. They
I
were
am
taken
telling you,
down.
2 of them are already preoccupied.
Stop it. You can argue with me all you want.
You know what, Omar, I
Fact
want to
is-
hear your take on this, actually, because there seems to be a disagreement here that you have a separate opinion of. Go ahead.
I think, to be honest with you, that this level of detail is that significant because at the end of the day, it's never about economic opportunity or economic suffocation. This is not ultimately about the economy. It's not as if you allow Palestinian lives a little bit more economic opportunity that they would be okay with a lack of freedom and a lack of human rights. That's really what the fundamental issue at the end of the day is. And I think as long as Israel keeps imagining that there is either a military solution to this issue or there's an economic solution to this issue, they're going to keep running into the same wall. And unfortunately, Palestinians are going to continue paying the heaviest price. What ultimately needs to change is that Israel has to start viewing Palestinians as full human beings who are deserving of the same freedom and equality and rights that Israelis enjoy. And that will be the only way that you're going to achieve fundamental change. And that's really the only path towards a less violent future in which both Palestinians and Israelis prosper moving forward.
Speaking of valuing life, Omar, last time we spoke, we actually looked at the case of Shireen Abu Akleh, the high-profile journalist that was killed in the Palestinian territories by Israeli gunfire. And we're still, months and months later, seeing no resolution to that very high-profile case. So I wanted to ask you, now we're seeing more innocent children actually being killed. What are the chances in this, and in the fog of war, I'll put it that way, because this is just bombardment. Israel's saying that this is Islamic Jihad's fault because their missiles backfired, killing their own people, and then Palestinians are saying, no, this is obviously Israeli missile fire that has killed these kids. So will there be any accountability for the innocent lives, which basically equates to war crimes by most definitions? Will there be any accountability in this case?
I don't think there will be. Unfortunately, we have a very, very long track record at this point of Israel getting away with a crime after crime against Palestinians. And unfortunately, unless there's a change in Washington's posture, there's not going to be meaningful accountability because so far, Israel has been able to brush off all the major human rights organizations that have issued report condemning Israeli war crime, brush off all the international institutions that have condemned Israel. And the U.S. keeps using its veto at the Security Council to shield Israel from any meaningful accountability at the UN. So that's really where the fundamental problem is. But there is no doubt that the Israeli military is actually the party that killed Shireen Abu Akleh. And there's no doubt about the fact that Israel is responsible for every death that has happened in Gaza. Even if there is a case of a misfired rocket or this or that, it's still Israel that created the situation in the first place by launching this unprovoked attack for purely petty political gain. You hear this idea, this cliche about how politicians do not care about the lives of people, but it really is the most extreme caricature of that in this case, in which Israeli politicians are willing to launch bombings of residential areas and literally kill civilians because they find it to be politically advantageous to them. And Washington putting up with it is really the biggest outrage of it all, because the Biden administration, in contrast to the Trump administration, keeps talking about the importance of putting human rights first and how human rights drives American foreign policy and we care about human rights. But then when it comes to Israel, they're insistent on this blank check that Israel is above the law, Israel is above accountability, and nobody can ever question anything that Israel does. And that really is what has to change. And I think that there needs to be greater movement in Washington, in the United States.
Will Yeah. Will we ever see Washington change its posture, as Omar put it, on this issue?
Let's unpack a couple things here. First of all, I'm not saying that economic peace is a substitute for Palestinian national aspirations. This is not binary, right? Everybody talks about it's either peace or war. The question is how do you begin to get small steps in a direction that can be an upcycle that would lead to Palestinian aspirations and a just peace between the parties. So let's not be overstated here. Okay, number one. Number two, it's the easiest thing just to blame Washington, right? You know what? It's all Washington's fault. It's all Trump's fault. It's all Biden's fault. What about the Israelis and the Palestinians? Where are they responsible for the issues that go on in their neighborhood? Nobody is leaving. The Palestinians aren't going anywhere. The Israelis aren't going anywhere. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict isn't even a top foreign policy agenda for us. So, let's take a break and let's
Why do you
put the
support
responsibility.
Israel?
Okay, Omar, very quick response, and then I want to get to Mustafa and look at some other issues as well. Omar, very quickly.
This is not a conflict at all. This is one side that is occupying another. This is a quote unquote conflict between an oppressor and an oppressed, where there is no balance of power. So what matters in this situation, like telling a criminal to stop committing a crime, yeah, that's nice, but where is that going to get you? It's about holding the criminal accountable. And in this case, the US gives Israel nearly $4 billion in military funding every single year. And frankly, Israel would not be able to behave the way it does if it did not have Washington's backing. And that's where accountability comes in. That's where Washington's role is actually quite significant.
Okay. Mustafa Barghouti, I want to move this conversation forward because we need to, when we talk about Washington, D.C. and the potential complicity there, as is seen by some, I have to ask you how complicit other parties might also be. Egypt right now, for example, is being congratulated for negotiating a ceasefire, but what about those underlying causes? All these solutions are temporary. We know this war will continue. Does Egypt, for example, in this case, deserve congratulations?
Yeah, they deserve congratulations because they did their best to stop the fire and to get ceasefire. So thank you to them. But that does not mean that they have solved the problem. As you said, the roots. We have to look at the roots of the issue. And the roots of the issue are very clear. You cannot equate here between the aggressor, the occupier, and the occupied. You cannot equate between the oppressing and the oppressed side. And that's exactly what your American guest is trying to do. Here we have a very clear situation where Israel was established on the Palestinian land, where it has confiscated Palestinian land. It has practiced ethnic cleansing, forcing 70% of the Palestinian population out of their land. And now they continued by occupying the rest of the country and creating the worst system of apartheid ever. So without dealing with these issues, we cannot have a solution to the problem. Now, the problem with Washington, and I'm sorry to get back to this issue, is that you have a very clear double standard. Why 6,000 punitive acts and sanctions were conducted against Russia? Because the Americans say that the Russians occupied Ukrainian land, and no single sanction was practiced against Israel for 74 years of occupation and oppression and apartheid. Why the United States continue to support Israel? And when Israel attacked Gaza on the same day, before even there was any Palestinian response, the Americans issued a statement saying that Israel has the right to defend itself. Does defending itself means attacking Palestinians? Is Washington considering us as equal human beings to Israelis or not? This is the basic issue. Okay. And that's why we have this problem.
Dave, you say it is about Israelis and Palestinians, and it is to a large extent, but we cannot deny that there are also proxy issues involved. I'd like to move on to another one with you, if you can address this, please. Palestinian Islamic Jihad also gets support from Iran. Is it perhaps in Iran's more cynical interest not to solve these problems and even to exacerbate them, because it gives them a proxy, of course, to go after Israel as well?
Of course, right? That's the whole point. The point is this is a complex, overlapping conflict that has lots of conflicting interests from multiple angles. And so, the most important thing is to begin to create some kind of upcycle. We can talk binary all we want, but the fact is, binary doesn't result in absolute changes. There's lots of interests that are in the Middle East, and everybody it's just the easiest thing to do to just blame Washington, right? It absolves
No, we're blaming Israel for Washington.
and that gives them a
We're
whole
blaming Washington for supporting Israel. Not we're blaming in the first place Israel. Israel is the occupier. Israel is the aggressor. Don't avoid the question. And Washington is supporting occupation. That is the issue.
I mean,
Okay.
Mustafa,
You tell me, do you accept Israeli occupation of Palestinian?
Omar, let me come back to Omar quickly. We know Palestinians have a legitimate cause to fight for. You've described it at length, but how much is that cause actually being exploited by other interests, not just the United States? We're talking about other proxy powers that do play a role here.
There is no question that a lot of parties around the world are exploiting the injustice that exists in Palestine in many, many different directions. It just is not particularly relevant to the fundamental issue. The fundamental issue is that there is no path forward on the so-called peace process that we've had launched over and over and over again that led to nothing but failure because Israel never took it seriously. That's the fundamental truth, is that Israel was supposed to withdraw from the occupied Palestinian territories to allow the creation of a Palestinian state. That was the whole mantra back in the 1990s. And Israel did the opposite. It kept expanding settlements to make Palestinian independence impossible. So in the face of lack of Israeli accountability, in the face of an Israeli government that has exploited so-called peace efforts to simply advance its control over Palestinians and make it permanent, imposing what now every major human rights organization in the world describes as an apartheid system, is what's really at issue. And as long as you can't fix that, then there's nothing else that can move forward. This is not about saying that only one side has ever done anything wrong. Lots of people have done wrong things in the world, and lots of them are related to this issue as well. But if we're serious about moving forward in a better direction, you have to deal with the fundamental issue. The fundamental issue is Israeli apartheid, and the only way you're going to budge Israel away from this path of thinking it can oppress and step over the necks of Palestinians forever is to have the only party in the world that has leverage over Israel, Washington, change its behavior. Otherwise, we're looking at a very, very long and bloody future.
Okay, Mustafa Barghouti, we just have a few minutes left, and I needed to get to this because, yes, there is a fundamental issue here, as Omar was arguing, but there are also many complexities. It's not just about the international complexities that we've been discussing with Washington's role, et cetera. There are also issues inside Palestine and the divisions that exist within. And in this specific case, I need to ask you what the relationship is between Hamas and Islamic Jihad of Palestine. Are they on the same page? Are they fighting for the same cause? Or is there a level of cynical playing behind the scenes to undermine each other?
No, they are on the same page and they are fighting the same enemy. And of course, one of the Israeli efforts during this last aggression was to create split inside the resistance groups, claiming that there is a contradiction between Hamas and Jihad, claiming that Jihad is more terrorist than Hamas. But in reality, Jihad abstained from getting into that trap. And the statement of the Secretary General of the Hamas, of the Jihad group, was very clear. He spoke about unity, he spoke about coordination with other groups. It's true that Hamas did not get involved in this fight because the Palestinians did not want it to be escalated. And they knew that Israel had an aggression and their goal was to weaken Palestinian resistance in the West Bank. So they kept it at a certain level till Israel stopped the aggression. That is how it is. But on the other hand, yes, there is a division still in Palestine between Fatah and Hamas, between West Bank and Gaza. And I think the main conclusion from what has happened recently in Gaza is that we need unity more than any time before. And what we are calling for as a democratic force in Palestine that is not aligned with Fatah or Hamas is for the creation of a unified Palestinian leadership and bringing back our democratic system by having democratic elections, allowing Palestinians to choose their leaders democratically.
And Omar, your take on Palestinian unity, especially between Islamic Jihad and Hamas?
Yeah. And look, divide and conquer is an old strategy as time. And in this case, I think it's a lot more about rhetoric for Israel than anything else. I don't think that, you remember during negotiations, they would say, oh, Palestinians are divided. We can't really negotiate with them. It's not going to work. And then when Hamas and Fatah did have an agreement to unite, then they would say, oh, we can't negotiate because we could never negotiate with a government that Hamas is a part of. So it's all just rhetorical deflections. And ultimately, even this attack on Gaza was completely cynical. This is about Lapid trying to improve his standing in polls, because unfortunately, Israeli society is at a point to where anytime you're not doing very well politically, you just attack Palestinians, and that can give you a little bit of a bump leading into the upcoming election. And so all of this talk about trying to divide Hamas and Fatah, or Hamas and Islamic Jihad, and the rest of it, I think are all cynical, meaningless exercises. They're not ones that Israel is very serious about. They know that there is a power imbalance. They know they can impose their will on Palestinians, and everything that they say beyond that is simply rhetoric to cover for what their actual political agenda is at the end of the day, which is that they remain dominant and Palestinians remain subservient in a permanent system of apartheid that will only change if the world decides that it can no longer tolerate it.
Omar Baddar, Mustafa Barghouti, and Dave Harden, I'd like to thank all three of you so much for being with us on this edition of the Newsmakers. Greatly appreciated. And to our viewers, of course, for being with us as well. Remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Twitter. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.